think. Perfect. Okay, so I think we are absolutely live on Facebook. We are live with all these wonderful people that have come to join us here on Zoom. And I'm going to, before I forget, hit the record button to save this for posterity. The Miller Family Wine Company and Jay Wilkes, who sponsor us here at Day Drinking with Wes Hagen, would like to welcome Karen MacNeil, author of the Wine Bible, and so many other things. Wine writer, lecturer. I call you the first lady of American wine letters, because I don't know if you think about from a perspective of the writers who have changed American wine writing. I don't think you can maybe even overstate what this has done. And we're going to talk a little bit about the hubris of calling your own book the Bible, but that's going to be a fun little thing. I want to first of all welcome you. And I did a little research. I couldn't find any men who have won both an Emmy and a James Beard. I thought Alton would have won one, Alton Brown. Not true. The ones I could find were yourself, Julia Child, Vivian Howard, and Lydia Bastianich. Wow, that's not a bad group to be on. So I'm humbled that you would take time to be with us here on Day Drinking. So cheers. Thank you so much. We've got a little of the 2018
Thank you, Wes.
Pinot Noir in the glass. I'm drinking a little beer to make sure my blood glucose is well taken care of. But cheers and welcome. And in 2020, I think sometimes we all need a little day drink and we all need a little distraction. So welcome once again.
Pleasure.
So question for you, and as I ask this question, I will do a quick, and for each question, I have a very specific background for you. So we're getting a little classical here. I've never met a wine writer that dreamed of wine writing as a child. So what were your childhood ambitions, and how the heck did you end up writing and being thrown on this boat onto Homer's wine dark sea? How do we go from childhood ambition to you wanting to write about wine?
Well, I first of all, thank you. It's such a great pleasure to both see you again and be here. I'm very honored. I always did as a kid want to be a writer. And it was really funny because I wound up never taking a writing class. To this day, I haven't ever taken a writing class. But writing is one of the interesting occupations that if you can do it, you can do it. I mean, I remember as a young woman, going to in a sense, audition for writing articles for the New York Times. And they didn't ask, are you in Columbia Journalism School or anything like that? They said, here's a pen, sit down right now and write 3 paragraphs about pens in America. Whoa. And so it has always been it's always been wonderful to me because I was a really poor kid. I grew up in a poor, uneducated family. And writing was without a lot of, without any money, without any parental help. Writing was a way that you could kind of literally write your way out of your own background, in a sense. And then I suppose as time went on, I mean, when I was maybe 14 or 15, I thought, well, maybe, I don't know if I can be a writer, but I could probably be a teacher. And so in the end, I chose the 2 lowest paying occupations on the planet. What can I tell you?
I like to say that I retired from a very early career in public education and leveraged my millions into, basically into being an alcohol professional, which is just a nice way of saying I worked for the family winery for a while. But do you think writers are born, or do you think writers are made?
Are writers born or are writers made? I think they are largely born. If you put me down in Fiji tomorrow and I had no ability to make a living or anything else, the first thing I would do is sit down and start writing about where I was and describe the island or something. I mean, sometimes when people have asked me why, why I became a wine writer, the really true answer is I don't know. I think it chose me. I don't even think I chose it. Um, and it's not, I don't mean to say that with hubris or like it was some, grand idea of the universe to choose me, but just that you are somehow compelled to do something. And sometimes you don't even know why. It's not like becoming a lawyer or an accountant or anything like that, where you have a plan. You somehow a plan is inside of you, and you can go along or not.
That's amazing. A lot of times I do consulting for small vineyards, and when people say they want to plant a vineyard, I say, well, take me to lunch and I'll spend 2 hours doing everything I can to dissuade you. That the difference between planting a vineyard and burying money in your backyard is if you're lucky and the vineyard goes right, at least maybe you can have a drink 3 years later. But I would say that the only reason to pursue winemaking or wine writing is if you have no other opportunity. If you have, let me say that again. If you have no other choice, if you wake up every morning and you're driven to write about wine, if you're driven to try to understand wine. And I think we're in a really amazing place, and we'll go through this in some of the other questions, where we're in an American wine culture that's becoming. This is it. And it's about what you've done. And it's about what you've done. It's about what Harry Waugh did. It's about what Robert Lawrence Balzer did. It's about all of these people standing on each other's backs and seeing further. It's about Robert Parker. It's about Robert Mondavi. It's about all these people, and we're in this amazing moment where we're on the cusp of developing consciously an American wine culture. And what is an American wine culture? That's the greatest thing. As Americans, it can be a circus or it can be the most beautiful, elegant thing in the world. But as most things American, it meets someplace in the middle. Was there a seminal wine that stopped you in the tracks and made you a lover and a writer and a student of wine?
Well, I started drinking wine when I was 15, and I already lived on my own. And every night I would sit there and do my homework and have a glass of wine. And, I was, as I mentioned, really pretty poor, very poor, in fact. I was self-supporting entirely throughout high school. So when I was 15, you can bet that the wine I was drinking was like 89-cent Bulgarian bread, or the really like the worst Liebfraumilch, not even Blue Nun. I mean, Blue Nun was a step up. It was always under $1 a bottle. And I would get 5 glasses out of that. So it was about 20 cents, a night doing your homework. And So I loved wine for a long time before I hit a really great wine. I mean, I do remember several wines that, including Gigal Côte Rôtie when I was maybe 22. And I thought, wait a minute, who put pepper in the glass, right? Wine can't be this dramatic. And yet wine was this dramatic. But I think when you have a really deep and abiding love of wine, it's okay that you started with the really cheap stuff. Because what I loved about it was the culture of it. I loved the idea of it. I loved the civilized feeling, even as a 15-year-old, of sitting there reading my homework and drinking a glass of wine. I wouldn't have known then if it was a great wine anyway.
Yeah.
I just knew that it was, it felt right to me to do.
It's the greatest wine you've ever tasted. Is it a result of terroir? Is it a result of craft? Or was it a result of just dumb luck on the planet Earth? I mean, how do you think, to me, I guess the question I'm asking, to me, sometimes I don't know if there is a perfect wine, and I don't know if I'd want to taste it. Sometimes I think the charm of a wine is, the little mole on Cindy Crawford's face, that to me, a little rusticity and a little bit of character that's not necessarily perfect defines a wine. How do you break apart when you taste and evaluate a wine? What are you looking for as far as what comes from the vineyard versus sort of what comes from the human side? And is there a way to define that? That was kind of a question off the top of my head.
Yeah, I don't know that drinkers think that way. You think that way because you're a winemaker. And so you're trying to disassemble the puzzle and figure out where did these pieces come from. But I think drinkers, and I would say that I'm a drinker because I'm not a trained winemaker. We think about wine immediately very much more holistically. We think about flavor. Is this flavor compelling? And only later, maybe, as you're sitting there with the wine, you begin to wonder, ooh, did this strand come from this place and this strand come from this place? But wine writers, myself included, can get into big trouble by being too haughty about that and saying, oh, clearly they fermented this at very hot temperatures. You're like, what? You weren't there. How do you know? So I don't like it really when wine writers do that, and I try not to. Even if I'm guessing in my own office with my own staff, I would never write something like that because the truth is that we on the outside don't know, and we're not trained to know. You're trained to know.
I love that idea of the Zen mind, beginner mind. Zen Master Suzuki wrote a beautiful book called Zen Mind, Beginner Mind. The idea that your first meditation is always your best meditation because you never have any expectation. You walk into it, you breathe, you walk out. And then he asked the Dalai Lama, when did you become enlightened? He said, what would ever make you think that I'm enlightened? He's like, dude, you're the Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama's like, no, I've never been enlightened. I've never sought pure enlightenment because if I became enlightened, what would I do tomorrow? Mm-hmm. And I love that idea with wine too. Never a perfect wine, always moving forward, always trying to do better, but never expecting perfection because nature does not provide perfection.
Well, and we all have different probably views of what perfection would constitute, although I think there's no doubt that wine, great wine, in some way moves you, right? It moves you emotionally. And it may move you emotionally within a context, and you can't separate it from that context. But that's all right. It's when you ask people about their most, not people in the business like we are, but general people, they describe often some very humbling time when they were, I don't know, the car broke down and they had to walk to this trattoria outside of Tuscany, and they had this $2 carafe of Sangiovese, and it's astounding and wonderful that wine can move us. It doesn't have to be Chateau Latour.
And I remember reading in the Bible, and I've been going through it again and just enjoying the heck out of it, just the idea that there's nothing quite as grounding as and amazing as a smell that brings you back to childhood, a smell that brings you back to the experience. And Burgundy does it to me. Alsace does it to me. Sometimes California does it to me if it's in the right place at the right time. But certainly there is actually the olfactory lobe in our brain is in the exact, it's in the frontal lobe, completely and totally adjacent to our memory centers. So clearly aroma and bouquet, different things, are going to influence us and might have massively different influences on different people.
Totally.
Yep.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about the future. How do you think the future of wine is going to be guided by technology?
Well, it certainly is already being guided by technology in the vineyard, right? In the winery, for sure. and even in communications. I mean, what we're doing right now is technology at work. And I think it's wonderful. These live virtual tastings, even in our office, we call them LVTs already. We've done 70 of them with winemakers around the world. And they are, in the old days, as someone who has been a part of a winery, that in the not so old days, if you had to go and do a wine dinner in New York, it would be $10,000, right? You have to fly there, you have to get into a hotel in New York City, you have to pay for the restaurant and 30 people's dinners, and you might have reached half of those 30 people, 15 people. But with Zoom tastings like this, or Facebook Live, or Instagram, it is so it's fascinating to me how much we can galvanize the love of wine via technology. And I wouldn't have thought so a few years ago, but I think the wine industry is forever changed by what we're doing right this minute.
It's, I mean, horrific that we've lost on premise. I mean, it's horrific to me, the idea. This is the dichotomy. This is the irony, and it's a horrific irony that we have never been so connected and we have never been so distant. That here we are,
well said,
understanding wine like we never have, and we can't come together at table. And we'll get to that a little bit. I'm going to put up a quick, make sure I'll ask the question, then I'll put up my slide. Why do you think easily accessible and bite-sized chunks of wine education, so beautifully showcased in platforms like WineSpeed and Wine Folly, seeming to dominate in a pre and a mid-COVID world? Is this the future of wine journalism, a crutch to get US wine drinkers up to a European level of wine knowledge? Or is this just par for the course for a new educational paradigm that seems to consist of sound bites and that things that require visual interest, performative and passionate delivery? And please talk to us a little bit about WineSpeed, because I've been really enjoying being a member.
Wes, I think there are some things you should reconsider in that question.
Please.
First of all, it's not at all new. Putting together little snapshots of compelling ideas with wine is, yes, thank you, have behind you WineSpeed, my digital newsletter, which is free, by the way. Anyone can go on winespeed.com and we'll send it to you every Friday, comes to your inbox. But that idea I started that anyway, for myself in 1980, when I was the first wine and food editor of USA Today. And USA Today at that time had a rule that if you knew what you were talking about, you could say it in 17 words. Exactly that, 17 words.
Pre-Twitter.
And I can remember bristling about that and thinking, for example, I could never describe champagne and the process of champagne and the region and everything else and its importance in the world of wine in 17 words. And my editor said, if you're really good, you can. And over time, I came to see that actually what is at work, I think, in wine journalism is that we have a lot of subject experts and not many good writers at all. That people don't spend time agonizing about how to crystallize and talk about an idea in a very succinct way. It is the easiest thing in the world to write 2,500 words on any topic. It is so easy. I mean, you could just give me any topic in the wine industry, 5 pages, easy. 1 paragraph that is really good, very hard, very hard. And so, and I don't think it's just in wine. I think any good writer will tell you that you have to both know your stuff, but also really work hard at being a good writer to tell it in a short form. Now you referenced, so wine speed, that's what we do. We try and promise you that if you give us, 1 minute, less than the time it would take to open a bottle of wine, we'll give you, 6 nuggets of really fascinating wine information that you'll say to yourself, wow, that's really fascinating. I didn't know that, right? Visual books like Wine Folly are a little bit different because that's using infographics to talk about wine. And I think that's fair game too, and also very interesting. We're visual people, and why not do that as well? And Wine Folly does it extremely well. So I think. I actually think that if you turn the binoculars around on your question, really the other question is, why were we all trained to believe that we have to read, this 10-page wine article to understand anything? You don't. You don't. You can assimilate wine knowledge in lots of little pieces throughout years of your life. And it's absolutely a valid way to go.
It's really interesting because one of my greatest heroes is E.B. White, who was one of the greatest English teachers of all time. And he was famous for 3 words. When he would slam his fist as a professor, he would say, omit unnecessary words. If you want to get to the kernel meaning of any of your writing, get out every superfluous word. And that's how style emerges. And believe it or not, my college training was not in winemaking. It was in creative writing. So I write very good tasting notes. Although if you ask me to show chemical bond changes on a whiteboard, I have a very poetic and interesting knowledge of organic chemistry, but not an intensely academic one. So I love that idea. And I love how you've turned this around. The idea, maybe it's not that we're losing our ability to concentrate. Maybe always people have appreciated a terse, concentrated bit of information that gives them what they need to know.
It's certainly the success of the Wine Bible. There are people who tell me that they love the fact that they don't have to read linearly. They don't have to read from page 1 to page 999. They can open the book anywhere and find some fascinating side box. It was the first wine book to do that, but I'm working on the 3rd one right now. And it's clear to me as a teacher, as well as a writer, that those memorable nuggets of information are the building blocks of a larger comfort level with wine.
Do you think if you could like pull a trigger, push a button, and give everyone in the United States either a fierce and deep understanding of wine, but not the ability to just know what they love, or you would give them the comfort and the bravery to say exactly what they really think about every wine. What do you think is more important, being brave in your assertion about what you love, or a more kind of classical wine education to understand how the pieces go together and what maybe you should think is a great wine? How important is what the world tells you about what you love about wine versus what you actually love about wine?
You already know the answer.
I do. I mean, for myself. But why is it that so many people want to take that deep dive and understand? Is it they don't trust their own palate?
No. I think actually, the more you understand wine, the more it kind of, elucidates for yourself your own loves and passions and cravings and things like that. And I also think that it's no surprise that wine drinking tends to correlate with people who are lifelong learners, right? People who like learning stuff. Doctors are big, as a group, love wine, because it's not exact. There's some artistry here. It's like diagnosis, and there's science, but you never quite know why something is or how it's going to turn out. But you're an endlessly curious person, a person who wants to know. And so wine is not only about flavor, of course, which is the hedonistic part, but the part that we probably both love is that it's a head trip, right? It's just like, oh my God, I love the fact that I don't understand why this is the way this is. And I just want to know more about it. And so you can get on that gerbil wheel. And once you're on it for the whole rest of your life.
I'm going to use the gerbil wheel. I use the rabbit hole because you can go a foot down the rabbit hole and say, this is delicious or this isn't delicious. You can go further down the rabbit hole and say, this is California or this is Burgundy. You can go even further down, producer, production. That's what's great about it is this. There is a level of geekitude for every individual who wants to jump in and play. I'm going to go ahead and give you a really, how does one engage? This is a very a question specifically about your process of writing the Wine Bible. But how does one engage in a process of writing a book called the Wine Bible? Was there a moment that the title became, or did you have the idea from the beginning that this would be a Bible of wine? What about this book qualifies it to be called as such?
Yeah, no, I have to tell you this because it's really very funny. For all the 8 years that it took to write the first edition, and then the 2 more years it took the publisher to do it. So 10 years total, 10 unpaid years, mind you, 10 unpaid years. It was called something different. And when I signed the contract with Workman, Peter Workman said to me, can you have this book done in a year? And I said, yes. And a year went by and he said, where's the book? Called me up and I said, Peter, it's kind of bigger than we talked about. Fine, he said, you need another year? I said, yeah, I need another year. He hangs up the phone. Every year now for the next 8 years, he would call me pretty much on the same day, once a year. He would say, are you in your pajamas? Or is this book really being written? And I would say, I promise you, it is being written, but it's bigger than we talked about. Anyway, at the end of 8 years, I walked in to his office late one afternoon with this 3,000-page manuscript. And he sat there, I sat in across from his desk, and Peter Workman was a legendary publisher in New York. Unfortunately, he died about 15 years ago. Anyway, he sat there and he read and read for about a half an hour. I was silent. And he said, oh my God, it's great. And we're going to call it the Wine Bible. And I said, absolutely not. Absolutely not. You can't call it that, because it had never been called that in all these years. And he said, clearly you didn't really read your contract very well, because you, my dear, are a subject expert, but the title of a book is part of the book's marketing and you don't have a say. And I said, wait a minute, you're kidding. And he said, nope. You are not a marketing expert. It's entirely our decision what to call this book. I started crying. I'm like, you can't call it the Wine Bible. It's too big of a statement. And he looked at me and he said, listen, all those years, all those 8 years, I trusted you. And now you have to trust me. This is the Wine Bible, and that's what we're calling it.
It's a come to Moses moment.
And of course he was right, and I'm very grateful. I'm still, the first few years I was like a little embarrassed because it is a big statement, but it has in a sense become itself. And there was no other book like the Wine Bible. It was a very definitive change in the way wine was written about. If you remember, all the books that you and I probably grew up on reading were all done by all the great British wine writers.
Johnson,
And they were important but they were deathly to read.
Yeah, no, and the thing is I remember seeing this book as a kid, not as a kid, but as a young adult, and looking at it and saying, ooh, and I remember pulling it off of Steve Pepe's shelf to read it because I knew that it would be important. And what I loved about it was the nonlinear, I'm intensely unmedicated ADHD. So the fact that I can play and go here and go there and learn a little bit about this. And it's also lovely that I can jump in and it's definitive. It's almost like an encyclopedia in the sense that if there's a subject you need to learn, boom, no problem. But it's also a great book for an airplane, for an area where you may just pick up something and just want to get 3 minutes of education in, because it can be like sudden fiction that's going to hit you with a quick fact, or it can be a deep dive, which I think is an incredibly important moment for that.
I don't want you to, though, let me just say that while it may seem pretty, and our goal is to make it effortless to read, it is certainly not effortless to write. And we do all primary research. I think of myself as not only a person who agonizes over writing, but I agonize over research. And anyone on my staff can tell you that I will just keep hammering until we find the person who really understands a concept, who we can use as a source. And most wine books today are not written that way. Most wine books are very derivative. You can see, if Jancis made a mistake, you can see it in other people's wine books because most people are not doing primary research. And so we're not fast about it. That's it takes a long time to write a book like the Wine Bible because we try to be really painstaking about getting the story straight.
Well, that gives me great hope, because I always like to say that wine is liquid humanism, and that humanism is never in a hurry, whether it's Lucretius or Democritus, basically gathering the young people in Athens and giving them all a flagon of wine so they can all listen to current ideas and philosophy and science. This, to me, is what it's all about. It's about getting together, having a glass of wine, and sharing something meaningful. And if that is in what Carl Sagan called extragenetic information, in other words, human beings taking something out of their brain, putting it on paper, so we can understand the brain of people that have been dead for hundreds and thousands of years. Hundreds of thousands of years from now, I would love the idea that not only are people going to be reading about the current state of wine in the United States, the current state of wine in the world through your writing, but I'd also, love to be a part of that as far as, maybe a little footnote in the history of Santa Barbara County. So I love the idea that wine is ancient, it's eternal, and it encourages us to be more human, if you know what I mean. And I do love that about it.
Totally. No,
I tried to go through and make sure I asked a few questions from the beginning, the middle, and the end of the Wine Bible to prove to you that I actually went through it and read it when you sent me this beautifully signed copy. Here was a good one that I came up with. There's some great stuff in the Wine Bible, really about the difference between balance and integration in wine. And I found this to be fascinating. Two terms that are used by many as almost interchangeable, but you disagree. What do you think is the difference between balance and integration in a wine?
Yeah, well, balance is, of course, such an important word, right? We all know that that's an important characteristic of wine, but it's also an overused word. And, I sometimes feel like when a group of wine people get together, if you don't know what else to say, you say, oh, it's pretty balanced. But I've thought a lot about that concept, in part because early on, I couldn't define it myself. I thought I knew what it meant, but I've come to this conclusion. Here's what balance is. Balance is a characteristic that a young wine has when all of its components are in dynamic but perfect opposition, perfect contrapuntal tension in a sense. And the example that I sometimes use, because that sounds so highfalutin a bit, but the example I sometimes use is like a Thai soup, right? Something sour, something sweet, something bitter, something herbal, right? It's not really integrated, but it's in perfect balance with each other, those components. And in a young wine, you can sort of sense that. Here's the fruit, here's the oak, here's a little tannin, here's a little acid. It's great. Wines that are really well balanced when they're young become integrated when they're old, because when they're old, then these ideas begin to coalesce. It's why describing an old wine is so difficult to do. I mean, for a writer, I can tell you, man, you taste a really great old wine, you just put down your pen. There is nothing to say, because those flavors have so coalesced into something else that you can no longer feel the outside balance in a way. It's just all integrated. So that's how I define those two terms.
That's awesome.
And I think most winemakers would agree. Would you agree?
I would. You know, I think integration is a great way of talking about when you get a polymerization of the tannins. Tannins start as monomers. As the monomers begin to form chains, they become polymeric. And as a polymeric tannin tends to be a little more velveteen on the palate, tends to give a little more softness, a little more completeness. Three things that really came up that I'll go through incredibly quickly. Heidi Peterson Barrett was in my first panel when I judged wine at the LA County Fair. She said, just think about it like either the wine is round or it's not round. That's what I learned in Germany. Either it has a beginning, a middle, and an end, or it doesn't. Either it makes a full circle or it doesn't. If it doesn't, it can later in its life. So it's either round or not round. The other thing that I thought of was a Disney movie. There's always a great protagonist, which I always think of as fruit and extract, and always a great antagonist, which I think about as structure and acid. You have to have the tension between the good guy, the fruit, and a little bit of the tension of the acidity and the structure to bring us back. And every human beverage that's delicious, from orange juice, Coca-Cola, wine, beer, has that tension between fruit and acid. And I think that is, in literature, the tension is antagonist, protagonist. In beverages, it's fruit, which could be included with sweetness, and the structure that has the tannin in tea, the tannin in coffee, and the acidity that really livens the wine.
I disagree a little bit, because many of the great wines of the world are not essentially fruity. That's a real California perspective. I spent most of my adult life in New York before moving to Napa Valley, and I'm here in my kitchen. I mean, I've been here for a while now, and certainly feel, like a Californian now after 20 years. But, in my office, we still taste a lot of wines from around the world. And certain wines, Chianti Classico is not essentially a fruity wine. Chateauneuf de Pape is not essentially a fruity wine. Even Burgundy is not essentially a fruity wine. These are wines that are very vinous. They're earthy. They taste like rocks and tar and blood and sweat and meat and things that are, and salt and tea and coffee. But they don't taste like cherries. It's not fruity. And in fact, that's why they're loved. So I don't know. I think, when you grow up with a California palate, I have to watch this in myself, because it's so seductive fruit, right? For all the evolutionary reasons we know. But you have to, tasting worldwide, you have to put a different mindset on, because if you go looking for fruit in Chianti, sorry, you're getting tar, tannin, acid, coffee, roasted things, rocks. There aren't any cherries there.
10 years ago, was there less because of potential climate change? Are we starting to see a new world is or a globalization of wine style by virtue of.
Yeah, and that's a fair point. And we probably did see less because of global change, and we probably did see less because people didn't share information quite so much and didn't mimic each other quite so much. But I also think that we're almost through that cycle, that you see this in Italy and Spain. People in the very beginning were like, oh man, if they can do it in California, we can do it too. And now a lot of the top vintners are saying, but wait, we don't want to lose. We don't want to lose the 2,000 years that we have going here just to seem like California or Australia or Argentina or any other place. So I think what we also see, even in California too, I don't, 20 years ago, if I interviewed any Napa Valley wine producer, they would mention Bordeaux. Nobody mentions Bordeaux anymore. I'm sure in Santa Barbara County, 20 years ago, everybody talked about Pinot Noir and what it does in Burgundy. Places like Santa Maria and Santa Rita Hills and Santa Ynez have their own gravitas now. They don't need any referential or reference points anymore. It's so in a way, the future is back to something that was very ancient.
I love when you brought up when you're making a note, you have to experience the wine and go beyond language, because the one thing that I would share as far as a quick anecdote about Burgundy in California is tasting the 1995 vintage of Domaine de la Romanée-Conti next to Alberta Villain at the California Club. And he was watching me take all these notes, and I was taking notes on all of the releases. We tasted all of the DRC releases. And when I got to the Romanée-Conti, I stuck it in my nose and I made a noise. And whatever noise I made clearly got his attention. And they parked me next to him because they knew I was a winemaker and that I had, that maybe I could have, his wife was from Santa Barbara. Maybe we would have something to talk about. And he looked down at me, and I'd make voluminous notes on all of the DRC wines, from the Montrachet all the way to the La Tâche. And I got to the DRC and my notes were FU ... with a line going to the bottom of the page. Aubert looked at me and said, "That is the first honest note you've made all night." So kind of made me wonder, maybe Americans are a little uptight. I did have a question from the audience, and I got a new one too. What are we drinking and why?
Oh, well, I'm drinking two things. I know you're drinking beer for one thing.
I'm drinking two things too, so we're on equal footing.
We're not going to hold that against you, big guy, but yeah. Oh, I'm drinking your wine, the Wilkes, the J. Wilkes 2018 Pinot Noir from Santa Maria Valley. Here's proof. Here it is, right here. There we go.
I've seen that bottle.
Yeah, and I'm also drinking a champagne. I'm a big, is it 5 o'clock? It is 5 o'clock. It's past 5 o'clock. I have a glass of champagne every night and have for about 20 years. It's a great love, and I really look forward to it. So I thought, well, Pinot Noir, champagne are kind of related. I think I'll try them both.
Any producer you want to give some love on your champagne?
Yeah, hold on. I'm going to get this bottle for you.
Oh, sure. And we got another question from Justin about Venice. Venice is the term we use at the University of California at Davis for anything that smells grapey. So this
is called Pierre Ballet, Le Village. It's a grower champagne. Just terrific. I'm in love with champagne, and it's fun we now in the US get so many grower champagnes all over the country that it's just fun to explore them. But I love, for me, champagne is like a sword wrapped in whipped cream. I just love the contrapuntal tension of that exactness, and then the richness from the lees, long lees aging.
I would say that the Widow Clicquot has been impugned in the sense that everything that she basically created and did is now attributed to Dom Perignon. Perhaps a Me Too moment. Maybe. Let me, I'm also drinking the 18 J. Wilkes Pinot Noir. It's very vinous. I got in trouble when I did some extension courses at UC Davis. I used the term grapey, and they said, we don't use the term grapey. You can describe any fruit, ester, or aroma except grapes in wine. And I thought that was very disingenuous, but they taught me to use the term vinous. Vinous just means it smells like primary fermentation. Primary is another great term that I like to use sort of interchangeably with vinous, but it smells like what? It smells like a winery. It smells like cherry pie. It smells beautiful and bright. Maybe vinous would mean something different to someone in Burgundy or in the Longueuil or in California.
I see people asking if I'm swirling sparkling, and the answer is yes, absolutely. It is, after all, a wine, and all wines benefit from swirling. And so I think we all who love wine, you know, one of the sad things about getting a glass of sparkling in a restaurant is that they fill it right to the top and put it in a really narrow glass. I want my glass to be vertical enough that I can see the bubbles and feel the bubbles, but have at least some round point so that I really can swirl.
So it looks like do you use one glass for everything, that nice big tulip bubble?
This is actually a brand new glass that I designed, and will come on the market in September, just being released in September. It's a line of just 3 glasses called Flavor First. And they are all based on flavor. So this is what we call the crisp and fresh glass. It is good for sparkling, rosé, Pinot Grigio. It's a different way. It's kind of like, again, turning the binoculars around. Instead of thinking about Bordeaux, Burgundy, Piedmont, just think about flavor. What kinds of flavors do you like? If you like fresh and crisp flavors, this is the glass. Here's your wine, the J. Wilkes, in what we call the creamy and silky glass. And it tastes creamy and silky.
Beautiful. I love the idea too of an aromatic, a standard aromatic white wine glass, a glass for something that's going to be a little more silky, maybe Pinot Noir, and then the third one's going to be maybe bigger tannic wine.
Yeah, it's the bold and powerful glass.
There we go.
We're doing a tasting here. So this is a Cabernet, and actually from Stagecoach Vineyard. And so you can see a little bit more depth, a little bit more bilge in the sort of bottom of the glass to really maximize air.
I would also suggest, if you have a doctor that says you can only have 1 glass a day, but these would be excellent glasses because it looks like you could put almost a half a bottle of wine in that glass and still have room to swirl. Maybe because it's so close. They're not oversized. It's because of the way the zoom is. I like big glasses. What can I say? I had a question. Let's bust this one out, then we'll go to my question, and then we'll go someplace else. What do you think of besides Champagne, Cremants from Alsace, Loire? So Cremant to Alsace, sparkling Vouvray. What are your favorite bubbles outside of Champagne?
Wow, there are so many good ones now. Cremant d'Alsace is just fantastic. I mean, $16 a bottle often, right? So it's like $3 a glass. It's astounding. And those are usually, the Cremant d'Alsaces are usually made 100% from Chardonnay, and they're just absolutely beautiful. I love California sparkling wine. I think the top producers of California, Roederer Estate, Schramsberg, Domaine Carneros, make beautiful, beautiful wines. South Africa makes some surprisingly good sparkling wines. Where else can I think of? In France, Crémant de Bourgogne, I think, is a little bit of an afterthought in Burgundy. They're not as to me, I would always choose Crémant d'Alsace before I would do Crémant de Bourgogne or Crémant de Loire, although there's tons and tons of Crémant de Loire out there. So you could spend a lot of time and not very much money having a blast drinking bubbles every night. And I hate it when people say that sparkling wine and champagne are expensive. They are not. I mean, even I drink mostly champagne, but not exclusively. I buy a couple of different $35 champagnes as sort of basic drinking champagne. That's $8 a glass. Yeah. I know people who spend more than that at Starbucks every day.
Or on beer.
Or on beer, right. So that's fine. I mean, it's my one indulgence, not, I'm not a clothes horse. I don't drive a really fancy car, but can I have one $8 glass of champagne every night?
Of course.
I can. I'm going to do that.
My wife is a self-avowed sparkling fan. She will say no to me any day, but she will never say no to a glass of bubbles. So
good woman.
As far as domestic tranquility within my household really does rely on what my refrigerator looks like in the garage. Let's go to table, because table is really what I think we're both in this business for. Table is the reason specifically I'm a winemaker. It's an integral part of how I talk about and how I sell wine. Never before have we had more time to spend at table, but never before in my life have I been so restricted to have guests at my table. In the greatest slow movement in the history of our lifetimes, in the least social part in history, in our history, what has changed, what stays the same, and how does life go back to normal in a how do we come out of COVID, and what are we losing from table, and how important is table, and how do you see table changing through this difficult period?
I don't know, right? I mean, none of us really know. I guess I hope that actually we're not losing anything at all. What we are is being reminded of how important what we had was. And I'm cheered by the number of people who have taken up bread baking and who stay home with their significant other spouse or loved ones, and have now family dinners again and things like that. It's quite possible that for large parts of the United States, we haven't so much lost as gained, understood that part of life is really important. But I don't know, right? None of us do.
It's interesting. I read in Steven Pinker's fabulous book, Enlightenment Now, that we've always thought that during modern times, we've lost time with our children. We've lost time at table. That's not true. We're actually spending as much or more time at table and as much or more time with our kids than we ever did in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. So this idea that the 50s, 60s, and 70s were somehow this magical time that we need to get back to is completely false. This idea that, and now I think there's a great longing. The question, I guess, is what I'm getting at is, how are we going to take this longing for connection and engage it once we have the capacity to be vaccinated and safe in the world? Do you think this is going to launch sort of a social revolution of us wanting to be together more and more and more once we have the opportunity?
I don't know. It's a long road back, because when we look back right now, when you think about what you were doing a year ago and going out to dinner and having friends, I almost think of it as a time of great innocence. Who knew that germs were going everywhere, and that I don't know that we go back to that time of innocence. On the other hand, after 1918, after the big flu epidemic of 1918, we did go back to to a time of, if you were French, kissing 3 times and hugging people and doing all the things that seem so very important and human to do. I don't know. It's going to be, I guess from a journalistic standpoint, you don't want to say, you just want to watch. You just want to see what people do. So for me, I'm not thinking so much about what's going to happen once we get by this. I'm thinking, I hope people are paying more attention to, I hope they're staying home. I hope they're wearing masks. I hope they're not having barbecues in the backyard, even though God knows we are all desperate to do that stuff. It's a difficult and horrible time. And the only way out is for people to stop being so self-indulgent and to stay home and stay isolated, in my opinion. And
I couldn't agree more.
It's a terrible thing to have to say, but everybody's health depends on it. It isn't just any one of us.
No, trusting science, trusting medicine, I think is important. And I love the sort of Nick Carraway sort of the idea that the journalists are always on the edge of the action and they're always looking in on the action and understanding. I think of the narrator of The Great Gatsby being a huge part of that, the greatest narration possibly in the history of American literature, watching, being careful, observing, and hoping people do the same. I wanted to bring up Emile Peynaud, and he's one of my greatest heroes. And I will bring up this picture and move out of the way just for a moment to show that's Emile. Emile said something that I think is one of the most interesting things in the world. He said that here's the fundamental problem of wine. If you put one wine in front of me, the fundamental question is, do I enjoy this wine? If I put 2 wines in front of you, the question changes to which do I prefer? Is this the fundamental problem of wine, and how do we solve it?
I certainly don't think it's the fundamental problem of wine. That's how the human brain works, it seems to me. We have a binary way of thinking about things. Is it black or white? Is it on or off? Is it red or blue? Is it go or stop? So 2 wines. It's why in classes, though, I mean, he's certainly right that when you give people 2 things, they will inevitably compare them, which is why in any kind of a wine class, I would never give people 2 wines, even at dinner. Wow. I try in the old days, right before COVID, if I had a dinner party, I would try never to put 2 wines in front of people. I would put 3 wines in front of them, because 3 wines is now a conversation. Oh, I thought I liked this, but now I'm going to go back to that. 3 wines is really mixes the brain up in a good way. You have to really think about more than just the binary on off. So, yeah.
No, I think that's fantastic. I'll before our speed round, and you got to wait for the speed round because that's going to be loads of fun. I'm going to skip to, is there one U.S. wine region relatively unknown that's really making surprising amounts of great wine? And is there someplace out in the old world or in the greater world of wine that you would say, hey, you really need to start paying attention to X?
Yeah, I think people really need to, in the old world, I'm pouring myself some more champagne.
Please.
In the old world, I think people need to start to pay attention to China. Sorry, that's not the old world, the new world. But in the old world, Croatia, places in the former Yugoslavia, which make fantastic Slovenia and Croatia, big sources of extraordinary wine historically. I think Austria is still not getting its due in terms of the kinds of wines that are the quality of the wines that are made there, the sheer, intense Gruner Veltliners and Rieslings in particular. In the New World, anyone who's in the business certainly has to think about China. Last year, I spent a week at Aoyun, which is at 8,000 feet in the Himalayas. That wine could have been a Napa Valley wine. It was amazing. And I mean, it's just astounding to walk in a vineyard and have like 100 yaks in there walking around the vineyard with you. Yaks are just everywhere in Tibet. So it's a much bigger world. In our country, I think there's no question that Oregon is on this amazing roll. Oh my God, Oregon Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, they worked so hard for the last couple of decades, and then, man, it just sort of all came together. Places like Walla Walla in Washington, making some of the most exciting Syrahs and Cabernets in the country. And then your region, perhaps most of all, I think Southern California, used to be, I don't know, there's Napa and Sonoma. Oh, by the way, there's Southern California. And that's certainly not true anymore. One could argue that the most exciting Pinot Noirs, or certainly among the most exciting Pinot Noirs in the world, are coming out of Santa Rita Hills and Santa Ynez and Santa Maria, maybe Santa Maria and Santa Ynez Hills, Santa Rita Hills, especially. Just, you're lucky to be in one of those emerging or already emerged new regions.
And let me go ahead and actually give a crazy spoiler that is the first time this has ever been announced in anywhere in the world. Santa Barbara's about to get its 7th AVA, which I wrote. And I just heard from the TTB that the Alisos Canyon AVA will be published within the next 3 weeks within the Federal Register. So the Santa Barbara County will have its 7th AVA, which will be focused on Rhone varietals, and a beautiful little area really represented by, to me, the Thompson Vineyard, which is the #1 vineyard in the area, which makes some of the best Rhone varietals in Santa Barbara County. So we're extremely excited about that. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. We got a little bit in on Santa Barbara County. What we're going to do now is we're going to jump into the speed round. Are you ready for potentially some of the most fun and arbitrary questions you've ever been asked?
I'm ready.
Okay, I'm going to put up a good proper picture while we do this. Before we jump into the speed round, just in case I forget, tell people how to buy the Wine Bible. Tell people how to get involved in Wine Speed.
Yeah, thank you, Wes. So both you can buy the Wine Bible and also sign up and get Wine Speed for free just by going to winespeed.com. And the name Wine Speed comes from, you can do it fast, right? So it's very effortless, and there'll be a button there that says sign up for Wine Speed, and also a button to buy the Wine Bible. And if you'd like, I'm happy to sign it. And it will also, there'll also be an area that says, would you like it personalized? So if you want to, you wanted to say, to my dear friend Wes, it can say that, and or anyone else.
You have some of the most beautiful penmanship I've ever seen, I have to say. Okay, here we go. Speed round. So again, all the answers are arbitrary, and I decide what is truth, which is, as someone with my brain, I'm extremely excited about. The first question will definitely be the most controversial. So who can hold their liquor better, you or Jancis Robinson?
Jancis.
Okay. What New York deli had the best butter when you were 19?
Katz's.
And this was one of her first articles for the Village Voice. Better value, Beaujolais or Loire?
Beaujolais.
Woo. Oh, by the way, correct. And it's only the second question is correct because I've never been to New York City, but I will. I will. I have a plan. What two people with the given name Robert have done more for California wine than any other?
Robert Mondavi and Robert Balzer.
That is correct. I would have also taken Parker.
Oh, Parker.
And I'll tell you why is just because I think, Parker did for California wine what Disney did for Dalmatians.
I thought you meant, though, people who had to have been born or lived in California.
No, I would say that is fine. But I would say that I think Robert Balzer probably started wine journalism, but Robert Parker probably sold more bottles. But I would
absolutely.
That gets you credit. You are currently 4 for 4. Wine writer skills match. Would you if we put Harry Waugh versus Robert Lawrence Balzer, who do you think was a better writer?
Oh, I'm going to say Harry Waugh there.
I would agree. That's 5 for 5. Who was William Bowers Bourne II?
William Bowers Bourne. Oh, the second. I feel like I know that name. God, if it's in the wine Bible and I can't remember, I'm going to be so embarrassed. Okay. Was it your father?
No, he was the gentleman who conceived Greystone Cellars in Napa.
Ah, okay.
And yes, he was. I mean, it wasn't the architect, but he put the thing together.
Because Hamden McIntyre, had you asked me the architect, I would have known Hamden.
Yeah, this is the guy who probably paid the architect. Who said the pop of a cork should sound like a gunshot with a silencer?
Tattinger, the young Tattinger, the current Tattinger.
And that is correct. His first name is Clovis. And that I took straight from the Bible. I'm going to give you half on that. Who said, I drink champagne when I'm happy and when I'm sad. Sometimes I drink it when I'm alone. When I have company, I consider it obligatory. I trifle with it if I'm not hungry and drink it when I am. Otherwise, I never touch this stuff unless I'm thirsty.
Lily Bollinger.
100%. One of my favorite quotes in wine. What white grape variety was interplanted and co-fermented with Romani Conti until 1956?
It has to be, begins with an A. Blocking the name.
I'll tell you, I'll give you the hint. It is not Aligoté.
Oh, it's not Aligoté. Gamay? Could it have been Gamay?
Believe it or not, until 1956, 10% of
Romani Conti. Well, you said white. Yeah.
Yeah, white grape. I'll give you the last chance.
Pinot Blanc?
That's correct. You got it. Pinot Blanc was interplanted as 10% of Romani Conti until 1956. I'm still mind blown. As a Pinot Blanc aficionado, there's not a lot of great quotes about Pinot Blanc. That's one of them. Last question. And you've already won because you already got, I think you're 8.5 out of 10, out of 9 right now. Which was the best wine movie out of these options? Sideways, Bottle Shock, A Good Year, or Walk in the Clouds?
Oh my God. Well, it couldn't be Bottle Shock because that was so badly done. I mean, it was just like, ah.
Are you really going to put
Sideways?
You're going to put a female winemaking, like basically doing like a soft porn washing a press. That was not right.
Not Bottle Shock and not Sideways. Those guys were such jerks. I hated those guys.
Sideways did for Santa Barbara Pinot Noir what the Soviet Union did for socialism.
Yeah.
Moving on.
Well, yeah.
So we got a good year or a Walk in the Clouds?
Walk in the Clouds. Oh, I'm going to go with A Good Year.
I agree. I would agree. Walk in the Clouds. I mean, come on, like Gossamer Wings. The vineyards are like basically burning, like they were made out of, made out of a fuse. It was that's absolutely true. That you have done extraordinarily well, and you have won an amazing prize. So the Miller Family Wine Company and Jay Wilkes will send you a wonderful package of wines that you can throw in your cellar and at some point enjoy and drink. In the end, any comments about the Jay Wilkes Pinot Noir, and then we'll put this to bed.
Well, what a nice idea. So what what I found, let me give it another nice smell here, but this is a very earthy Pinot Noir, it seems to me, and lots of beautiful cinnamony and earth, spice and earth kind of Pinot Noir. Several years ago, my lead assistant was a woman now studying in the Master of Wine program, who was Korean. I'm sure she'll be the first Korean Master of Wine. Anyway, because she was Korean, she would always say to me, she would describe these incredible Korean root vegetables. And I got to the point where, and as we all know, Burgundy is often described in terms of roots and earth. And I got to the point where I thought I kind of knew what she meant by all these Korean root vegetables. Anyway, as I was tasting this wine, I was thinking about that idea of wine connecting you to the earth and being really earthy and rooty. And then, of course, spicy too.
Great. And we use almost, this is probably one of the least oaked Pinot Noirs in the country. We're going less than 5% new French oak on these wines.
Wow.
We put on the label, wines of character, wines of place. We really want people to understand that this is an expression that doesn't need, I always ask myself how many barrels to order. The first question I ask is, what's the fundamental deficit of this wine that requires oak to legitimize it? I don't find a lot of deficits in this wine. I want this wine to express a place that is not a French forest 6,000 miles away. So, and I do want it to be earthy. I do want it to be complex, and I don't want it to be just fruit in a glass that just basically, you know, a fruit cocktail that disappears on your palate. So,
yeah,
wonderful. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your passion. Thank you so much for this book that has changed my life and made me, you know, much more erudite in my understanding of wine globally. Congratulations on everything you've accomplished. Please continue to edit this book, so I need to buy it again every 5 years, because I certainly will. I encourage everyone watching, sign up for Wine Speed, get yourself a copy of the new edition of the Wine Bible. Understand wine, love it, and don't worry about wine too much. Drink it, love it. And as I always say, find someone in your community, find someone in your family, and find someone maybe you're only generally connected to. Ask them if they need any help right now. The most important thing we can do right now is support each other, love each other, and show each other compassion, show each other understanding, trust science, trust medicine. Let's get through the other side of this so we can all be together at table again. And I hope sometime in the future, Karen, we can be at table together as well. So thank you again for all your time. And I thoroughly appreciate it. If you have any closing comments, I'd love to hear them.
Thank you, Wes. Well, I just want to say it's been such a great pleasure. I'm envious of your education. You clearly study the classics there, sir, and it shows. So thank you for all the very interesting and very intellectual questions. Most times people are just saying to me, what good red could I buy for $10? I'm just teasing.
I have to admit, this was the moment where I spent a lot of time researching every interview that I could ever find you doing. And I wanted to make sure that every single question was unique and that would stand up to the test of time, that if people were watching this 100 years from now, they would say, I now know more about Karen MacNeil. I know more about her style and her writing, and I know a little bit more about Wes Hagen and what he did. So thank you for that. I thoroughly appreciate it. Thanks to everyone who stuck with us and watched. And this has been recorded, and I'll put it up on YouTube, and we'll make it a permanent thing. So thank you again. Really do appreciate it. And Tink, really appreciate it. Cheers, everybody. Have a great night. Enjoy your Wednesday. Love the people you're with. Love the wine you're with. And goodness gracious, make sure to throw some love into the world, because we can all use it in 2020. Thank you to Karen MacNeil. Thanks to everyone who watched. Be well, everybody, and take care of yourself and be safe. Cheers. Thanks again.
Pleasure.